Today's world of work is moving faster than our systems, our leaders, and often our humans were designed to handle. AI is advancing, roles are changing, expectations keep rising, and somewhere in the middle, leaders are trying to figure out how to drive performance without burning people out or losing trust. And my guest today sits right at that intersection. Carlee Wolfe is the Associate Vice President of Integrated Talent and Organizational Effectiveness at Hyatt Hotels Corporation, where she spends her time shaping how leaders, skills, and culture and technology all come together in one of the most human-centered industries there is. She's also the founder of Ace and Arrow Consulting. She's a nonprofit board leader and a longtime coach in adaptive and inclusive sports. In this conversation, we explore what the future of work really demands from leaders, how organizations can integrate AI without eroding trust and human judgment, and what sport and community teaches about sustaining human performance in a relentless world. If you care about helping humans thrive while still delivering results, this episode's for you. Welcome to the Working Well podcast, the show that explores the critical intersection of leadership, business strategy, and sustainable human performance, and how those things are defining the future of work. I'm your host, Tim Boris. Carlee, it's awesome to have you on the show today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Based on our previous chat, this is going to be a great show. So thank you for joining me.
I mean, thank you for having me. I'm also very excited about this, so I appreciate the time.
Excellent. Well, I always like to start off. You've got a pretty unique background. You've been in a few quite different industries and companies. And how did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I fall into the category of I've been fortunate enough, maybe by intention of like working good places, staying with good leaders, but also falling into a lot of opportunities. But I think it's always been about doing good work, impacting people's lives, their careers, in the community and in sport, and making decisions for me that were important about like what I value and what I want to be contributing. And so, yeah, that's led me into starting in sport and moving into education, consulting, retail, and now in hospitality. So it's been a good run.
Amazing. And we're going to talk a lot about leadership, performance, future of work, particularly about keeping the human aspects of in the midst of all this technology change.
Yeah.
But from where you're sitting and your background, what do you feel is most misunderstood? Lots of people think they understand things, but what do you think is misunderstood about leadership and performance in the future of work?
I think we'll refine what's most understood. I think people understand that we're changing and it's moving quicker than we ever had. And I think there's a lot of excitement around that. I think the misunderstanding perhaps is where disruption is actually occurring and where that pace will move. And from a leadership perspective, what we can be doing to influence those things, both from how does this shape our organizations and the future of our organizations, but what does that shaping of the organization do to broader workforce and like in the places that we live? And so what I mean by that is I've been trying to find the right way to describe this. And I heard this mentioned in a conversation a few weeks ago. And I think the shift being, I think we're used to a lot of technology that comes in apps or has a specific solve. And AI is more of this maybe moldable clay, right? Sort of this like craft that sort of like lands on your desk. And to best use it, it's sort of what's the business case, the use case? How can I dive in? How can it either augment, support, do for, etc.? But there's still a shaping that comes with that. And so when organizations are moving fast, right? Hey, let's get this AI tool. Let's have this AI philosophy. I think there's a misunderstanding of we can sort of like plug this thing in and it will work versus how are we shifting mindsets into what it actually means to apply, leverage, and maximize AI. So I think that's part of the misnomer. And then on the leadership front, where can leaders be helping And I think the challenge there is that leaders right now have a lot of limitation on capacity to really lean into making mindset shifts versus, hey, here's a thing that we can now do. So that's one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing, and I think there's a lot of considerations when it comes.
I like that how you differentiated AI from the sort of app model. Yeah, because AI really will be integrated into so many different aspects of the business. How are you seeing, I guess, the understanding or the misunderstanding around the fear associated with a?
I think there's I think there's a lot of fears. I think at the organizational level, it might sound something like, are we moving fast enough? Like, are we getting it done quick enough? And are we, whether it's fast enough with our competitors? But also, I think there's sort of this fear of missing out type feeling out there, like, oh, we're just like not we're just not moving. So I think that is driving fear at the executive level. I think within leadership, right? We think about like frontline leaders. How do I lead in a different world? Do I want to lead in a different world? Can I talk about these things? Will I be here? I think that's fear. I think at a frontline level, it's, is my job going to be impacted? If it is, what does that mean? Do I need to learn this new skill? What happens if I don't learn this new skill and mindset? So I think like fear is like kind of running up and down the pipeline. And what I would add to that is also maybe the wraparound of what organizations are, which is every organizations employ people. And so I think there's also a greater fear of what's sort of shifting when we talk about industry and when we talk about workers in general. Like I think about specific cities that might just have certain type of, like, let's use tech, right? There's right now a huge disruption in folks who are doing developing. If those roles are changing, what does that do for the broader workforce? So yeah, I think that's where fear sits. I think, but we're also sitting in kind of this opportunity of how do you flip that fear into possibility, which is being curious about, well, what can I be doing to, I've been using this term sort of like author my own narrative in this. So let's go back to the frontline employee who's thinking like, do I need to learn this skill and shift my mindset? Is my job going to change? Well, like, let's flip that around. Like, what's possible? I can learn something new. I can learn something new at work that also applies to me in my personal life. I can expand my skills. Maybe I can actually open up a new opportunity for things that I'm doing. While I really have been disliking these 10 tasks that I've been having to do for years, like if I can offload that and invest my time in another way. So I think that's where the opportunity starts to come in. And I think we're in such this like messy middle spot that people, while it can feel, the big fear is that I don't have control. I think this is where people can start taking that control back, which is, what does it mean for me? How can I add value for myself and where I'd like to go in my career, and where I continue to have impact?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up because I've had, I can't even count how many coaching conversations over the past 6 months about the how to manage this fear and the mindset. And
Yeah.
I always come back to, yes, there with any change, the more change that happens, the more risk there is if you look at it from one perspective, but the more opportunity there is if you look at it from another perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We're essentially rebuilding what work and companies in the future looks like. So there's a
Yep.
tremendous amount of opportunity to curate what we want to do in some ways or another.
Totally. And I think, I talked about the moldable clay, right? So it's not an app where we're just solving one particular problem. I think that's where that mindset, you and I are in the mindset space right now.
Mhm.
What is it that I do in my job, or how I orient my impact to my organization? And now I have this moldable thing in front of me to actually help answer some of those questions. So the thing that I might be sitting there and saying, gosh, do leaders even understand what I'm doing? Why did they roll out this project to me? Why is it like built this way? It's flipping that and saying, well, how would you want it built? What problems are you trying to solve? And to be able to actually move that forward. And so I think that's how it also takes shape of like the big organization, the big like corporate view of, why did they think I have to do this? Or like, where did this idea come from? That's where you get to start to shape it differently. And I think that is really powerful, because I think we've gotten really far away from what do employees actually need in their roles to best perform and deliver in the things that we expect them to do. I think we put a lot of barriers in front of folks because we think it's like the right thing. Well, now it's shifting back into the employee's hands where they get to.
Yeah, and to do that well requires clear communication and an open dialogue with the people actually doing the work, which happens more in some companies than others. What are
Yeah.
you seeing around?
I think that there's conversation today about possibilities, similar probably the maybe a little bit of the level that you and I are at, which is imagine the possibilities. I think there's still a gap between imagine the possibilities to how do we then set people up for success? How do we create capacity for people? And when I say capacity, it's the actual space to learn something new, to explore, to try, to break, for leaders to have the capacity to think about how do I build this culture on my team, which is a learn out loud culture, a be curious culture, a learn together culture. And then what are the tools that collectively we need to get there? I've been seeing it's interesting in the desire to move AI forward. I still talk with friends and folks in network about, okay, well, what's your organization doing? What is your AI strategy? And I think the big storyline is like, oh, we have AI. Okay, but does everyone have it? Maybe not. Does everyone have training or space to do things? Maybe not. So I think it's digging in to start to think about those simple questions. And it's just, I'll repeat it. It's as simple as do people even have the literal AI tools in which we say we're implementing? Do they have those at their fingertips? And so I think there's a lot of ways to begin, a lot of ways to diagnose, and a lot of ways to.
I'm glad you brought up the capacity standpoint because that's a key thing that I see in what you described of the giving people the space to learn and build these new skills. That's ideal and what we would aspire to put in place. The reality I've seen from many places is that workloads are so high
Yeah.
and change is just being implemented, and the expectations on delivery for especially frontline employees just keeps increasing. So
Yeah.
what are you seeing around the human capacity of people to manage that workload and the expectations in the face of all this change?
Yeah. I mean, my big summary is I agree with you wholly. I think about sort of like scales, like if we had a scale around what we're expecting from folks and the weight of the scale of expectations of doing more, giving more, learning more, a lot of it's more, and in some cases it's also less. Maybe less resources, maybe actually less opportunities to go to training opportunities, less head count, fill in the blank. And so the scale is tipped really heavy on the employee side. There's very few relief valves that we're seeing, at least right now in this kind of inflection point. And so the question being, well, what can we do about that? And I always like to think about like, well, where do you want to begin? What's like the little step that you can take? Because the magic of AI is that it can add some efficiency or some support. And so perhaps this is one of the capacity release valves. The question is, how can you just begin? And the good news is that it could be something as simple as a team that may have never used actually like a prompt. Let's go to just generative AI, a prompt before to say, I spend 10 hours a week on this task. How can you help me do 10% less? Like, let's just start there. And you can start to then chip away at that scale and start to give some back to employees, which I think adds to the capacity. But I also love this conversation. It's something I think you and I are both passionate about because, right, in that example, I'm talking about capacity and can I deliver work and what does that look like? But I think capacity shows up in all kinds of ways. Today, we've talked about kind of like the mental health component of it. Am I stressed? There's a physical component of it. If I'm like working all the time, am I actually getting up from my desk and moving? In other words, am I performing in the whole sense of the word? And so I think one, work today is in conflict with the full capacity that we can have. Work can also be a place we can chip away at it. But I think it's important to talk about it wholly because I encourage people to think about it wholly, right? We bring our whole self to work. Our whole self is impacted by work. And so I think it should be also looked at about how we want to continue to move forward in a more like,
In a perfect world, work is helping us be better and grow and improve and learn and open more potential and capacity to do the work and as a human. No, I would say I wouldn't even say we're in the messy middle yet in that sense. Um,
yeah,
but I think with the right mindset of leadership moving forward, we can work towards that. And I think I've seen, well, maybe three camps.
mm,
There's some leaders I've seen are just like, great, AI is going to help us improve capacity. That means we're just going to double our output expectations or triple our output expectations, and from the same amount of people, we're just going to throw more at people. I've
yeah.
seen the other side is where leaders are like, hey, I know this is a great ability to take some of the workload off of people and help them thrive and maybe open some more capacity for learning and growth and development. And so we can keep people and help them sustain their performance over time. And then I guess the middle ground where it's like, hey, we might see the options for both, but we're almost caught in indecision right now. We're trying
Mm.
to implement it, but it's not working well in either way. And I guess I'd say, what if we think about that capacity metric? What are the early signals that tell you an organization's pace is outpacing its people's ability to recover, adapt, and perform?
I love the phrasing of the question because you talked about performing well, outpacing, and to me, those all sit in an indicator space, which is how are you measuring, how are you even measuring whether it's capacity or let's just go with performance to understand if those things are shifting. And so I'll use a metaphor, right, in sport, when let's just use a runner, right? If we're changing, if their capacity is to hold so much to run a race, and we're making adjustments on that, well, we have a finish line and we have a time associated with that. And so that's, by the way, that's just like one input. It's the easy, we're going to hold that because it's the easy example. I think the same sits with work. I think we're in a space right now, which is making a lot of assumptions, sort of like on the sell. Do this AI thing and you'll get 2 times the return. And yeah, you can pull some staff back or you can pull some work back. All right, well, let's actually like get in there and talk about what that means and what that looks like. Do we understand that at the organizational level, but more importantly, probably at the function, team, and individual level to say, is that shift even happening? So I think the answer to that starts with a good business decision, which is what are we trying to do and how are we going to measure it? And then sitting in that truth, because that also, right, what you and I are talking about is success, but I think there's a path also on the way to success, which is, are we actually seeing improvements? And if we're not, well, why not? Let's dig in and start to diagnose that, because there is a reason why we're trying to shift kind of our work here. But I think that also becomes part of the informed strategy. So another way, back to our sports metaphor, instead of just the finish of the run, what are our clips along the way to understand if we're at pace, right? We don't want to get to the end of the race and say we've been way behind or we overshot it. But what are we doing along the way to make adjustments?
Mm-hmm. And that brings up a interesting point. Is this, if you had to redefine high performance, say over the next decade,
Mm,
how would you define that? What would that look like?
mm. I love that. I definitely think there's a space for capacity in the one that we've been talking about, like in the human form, sort of health, um, physical health, mental health, what we're able to provide in output. Now, let's assume we can figure that out in an organization, that those aren't like just dicey terms, but something that we could be looking at. I think that performance from an output perspective, understanding where people are delivering, right? We can look at it from the task level. Are we producing 10 of these things? We can also look at it from a customer perspective. Are we engaging in a way that keeps people connected? So I think some balance of the, we'll maybe cut it into the human part of performance and the organizational component of performance, And maybe there's also a marriage between those two things. So that's like in the most conceptual form. But I think as AI continues to move and we open up possibilities, right? You're looking at things like I was just talking to somebody the other when someone leaves an organization, like let's just say someone goes on maternity leave, they're gone for a certain amount of time. If AI is already watching, like say I'm taking over those tasks when that person's on leave, if we already know that, and by the way, the person that's going on leave, we kind of know what their work looks like, who they've been connected with through like organizational network analysis, where their emails are at, because we can, pull those things. It starts to then frame up like, okay, Carlee's taking this over. Let's hand this over in a whole package. Carlee, this is where this person left off. Pick up these tasks. By the way, we're going to have to offload some of the other work that you're doing because we see you're at full capacity. By the way, we're going to shift your schedule now. Instead of going to the gym at 9 a.m., let's consider that at 10 a.m., but you're driving those decisions. I'm just like painting a hypothetical world. But I also saw some of these tools already in motion today. But largely, that's just to say there's so much stuff that I think can start to happen on the back end that when we understand what the capacity looks like, we understand what the organizational needs are, we can actually start to track those and find moments in time to help people to keep those in balance. So I use the maturity one just as an example because it's it's a handoff, it's a moment in time, but it's where we can be helping. But if you think about those moments throughout the day across multiple jobs, how are we moving that? So yeah, in summary, I'd love to see capacity and performance in one big measure of success, and I think we're going to see more opportunities to dig into more of that outside of the hypothetical that we've maybe even seen in not just the past, but even in this conversation, right? A little big picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the understanding that capacity changes based on
Oh
a
yeah.
number of factors, human and outside of human control.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Every day. Every day, multiple moments throughout the day, how we're engaging. Yeah, for sure. The weather, things in our lives, it all fluctuates.
mm-hmm. And yet, when we look at the most traditional corporate goals, capacity generally doesn't, the expectations on capacity don't necessarily change.
Mm. No, and I think it's because we look at it pretty linear, like in a very linear fashion, right? I think there's a lot of assumptions made in that, particularly because we just don't know a lot today. There's a lot of blind spots on how we think about output, but taking the assumption away and starting to frame out what the experience could truly be, I think is really powerful. And I think, by the way, it can really shift. We started this conversation about like thinking about like the humanness in this AI transformation. And I think this is where we maybe have possibility to bring even more human conversation in understanding the whole person and their performance. And that's why I love the sports linkage because I think everyone understands, or conceptually, even if they're not sports people, like that there is a physical component, a mental component to package into being really good. But why not? Why isn't that just still considered at work? We still are people. We are still performing in our jobs. We need to use our brains. We need to use our bodies. We need to use connect. And so I think doubling down in this space is only helpful because in this chapter, we absolutely need. I mean, I think we're going to be in a space for a long, long time where we need humans and connections to drive the innovation, to still drive the customer experience, ways of working. Right, we're just not a handoff point. In fact, there's even data coming out every single day about sort of the big myth of AI. And I'm not saying it's not real. I'm just saying like the promise that it will solve everything right now. So how do we? I'll go back to that point. Start treating humans as one, back to the human focus, but double downing on that to get more out of our.
Yeah, there's no doubt that technology will continue evolving and growing and becoming a more integral part of our life, short of a global EMP or something that takes everything out. But if you're thinking ahead over the next 3, 5, even 10 years, what do you see as the uniquely human skills that are going to be more and more valuable as technology becomes more integrated with what we do?
Yeah, innovation for sure. the pure nature of AI is that it is a huge uh, insight, knowledge, etc., that continues to be fueled by all of current state, right? And that is of today, and I think in the next 3 5 years, we're still talking about that. So newness. So back to why does it matter to invest in people? Think of organization A and organization B. Organizations like I'm all in on AI. How do we take more humanness out? And organizations be like, let's double down on human performance. In the innovation race, organization B is going to win every single time, right? Because you're going to have new thoughts and new ideas. So I think innovation is one of those categories. I think that how we lead and connect across systems is going to be a differentiation, and that being facilitated by humans. So one of the things, we've talked about leadership. One of the leadership qualities in the future will be how do you lead? We'll call it like multidisciplinary teams, or which could be people, bots, agents, etc. And that is also a different skill set, right? Thinking about what that fits in the ecosystem. So I think leading in new ways, that human capability, because you're starting to maximize the system as a whole versus parts and pieces. So I think that's another human component that's important. I think that human component is also about experience. We are still going to see so many places where the experience is going to matter. Think about customer needs. Think about pure play. I want to go on vacation. Someone still serves in that space coming from a hospitality angle. I think that community and connection will be even more of a draw for people. And so, how are organizations facilitating those types of things? So I think that's an experience is another human component that will continue. So I think, or continue, or even grow. So I think those are three examples right there. But all of that can be differentiated. By the way, obviously leadership across the board. I think experience can be explored in so many ways. Maybe you don't work in hotels, but I'm sure you serve people somewhere at the end of your line. Are all great things.
Hmm. I love that you brought up the leadership aspect in terms of bots and agents and people. Leaders are going to be those leadership skills are going to be, I believe, even more critical. I've had a number of conversations about that recently. Is that every human will need solid leadership skills as we are leading bots and AI agents.
Yep.
You still have to performance manage and critical thinking and evaluate results
Yep.
from those agents, even though they might not be human and there might be nuances to how you lead. But it's important to understand that that mindset has to be applied. I read a stat
Yes.
the other day, which was shocking and very scary, that something like 85, 87% of people just take verbatim the output of an AI right
Yeah.
now without any editing or critical thinking on their part of whether it might be correct or not, which
Yeah.
is shocking.
Yeah.
And that's probably not even custom GPTs. That's just straight out of the box.
For sure. And I think you're highlighting, and we're like circling around that like critical, like human part of it, which is maybe it's a new emphasis on critical thinking, of quality, of nuance, of knowing. And you're bringing up also the risky point of those assumptions, not just in the human component of the assumption, like, oh, AI will solve this, but also literally in the hands of the users. Because I've gathered it here, that's the solve. Why not get more curious about, does that actually look like the answer you're trying to solve for? Does that look like the best thing that you can be putting forth? And why do I want to care about that? I think it goes back to your purpose. Like, what are you trying to, if you're trying to deliver something in your role, what are you representing in terms of like what comes from you and the value that you're adding? So I think that, and that's just the intrinsic part of it. The organizational part being at some point that also catches up, because to your point, the quality isn't there, the answer isn't there. um, but instead of, I just go back to the curiosity part of it. Like, instead of just using it as like the plug and play, how can I dig in a little bit further? How can I add a little bit more? I just think there's so much possibility there.
I agree.
um, Yeah, you're bringing up a big one and a big risk also with where we're at. Back to performance, organizations are expecting, hey, we've provided this tool, but you're still bringing your human self to the tool, which tool plus human equals the performance and the output. And I think that needs to continue to be a handshake, and also where leaders can help support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting.
And some of it,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
well, I just had a thought. I was to say, I think some of it also comes down to understanding. We like at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about like knowledge and skill set and mindset. Sometimes we also we don't know what we don't know. Like if we're the manager who's running a team that has these tools, and the employees are just actually, let's just assume they're just trying to do their best. Like maybe they actually don't know I need to do a quality check. Like let's assume that for a second. I think this is also highlighting the importance of knowledge, creating capacity for testing things out, letting people fail, but learn through failure. I mean, I don't mean like run out and like make a big mistake. I just mean we have to play with it to understand where we can be successful. So I think we just ran the gamut of like how do we think about it from a performance angle, but how do we think about it from a learning angle? And now that we're talking about it, I think the latter is probably like one of the bigger concern or bigger maybe opportunities to address why is that 85% happening and how do we help out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and brings it to a point of that investing in skills and skill development, um, different mindsets, knowledge. I mean, a lot of organizations wait until I guess they're behind before they invest in skills. So, from your perspective, what does proactive capacity or capability building look like?
Mm. I think you and I are leaving on a really great point on like what does proactive look like. We already know that the vast majority of people are already struggling with being able to apply some of these simple skills. And so what are those simple things that you want to be able to move forward with, and how do you create that plan for your organization, whether that's understanding, whether that's application, like let's just stay in that those two areas. So understanding being, do we know what these resources are and how they can help me, and where the expectations are of where I also need to apply my own thinking and usage of. And then beyond that, what are the skills that I can do to expand understanding, right? How do I take an output and go deeper or go wider in terms of where we're driving? I also think a lot of this sits at the leadership level, being able to define that success, just like any sort of development plan. How am I looking at the skill sets of my team? How can I assess where they're at, where they need to go next week, next month, next quarter? And I think it is that intentional because we're talking about like incremental learnings and shifts and mindsets over time. I think we're in that. We're back into coach space. Like, there's always or a lot of times you hear the question in talent, like, are you in a player or coach role? Player being I'm doing all the work, coach being I'm supporting. I think we've moved heavier or full player, but maybe a coach hat when you have time. But I think this is the time to ask people to dust the coach hat off and really spend time, and to be able to dust that hat off and spend time with the local development needs by assessing and providing incremental support.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of that is the strategic thinking, the creating some bandwidth for yourself to actually step back from the day to day fray and say, okay, what do I need to be doing? What's the best use of my time?
Yeah.
And we talk about developing learning programs and capability building. It's usually just another thing added to the plate, and it just adds to the workload rather than taking things off the plate to allow that bandwidth. So
Mm-hmm.
I see a key aspect of leadership being, how do we create that bandwidth for our teams so that we're not going to overload them or just create this burnout cycle that happens, and we're seeing happen on a daily basis in business these days.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to, I think, a good leadership question that might just a good leadership question, which is asking individuals on your team and your team, where are they struggling the most? And can we use that as both a where can I support and bring in more capacity, but also a learning opportunity, a skill development. And I'll give an example. I mean, just the other day, one of the things that we're focused on in work is actually transitioning to a huge technology project, or HCM implementations to be specific. So a long road ahead of us, a lot of work ahead of us, and we are just beginning. And there's a lot of questions about how do I navigate questions? Where do we literally start? I've not done anything like this before. How do I get going? Oh my gosh, I have so many templates to fill out. And so we have been on a regular basis, like, what is on your plate? What are you most concerned about? And we've used those opportunities to find themes. We'll call them concern themes. And how do I help support and break those things down? Because sometimes there are barriers I can remove or support as supporting the team. Things like, all right, I can take this initiative off your plate because this is now not a priority compared to this. That's how that sounds. But as a team, we've also then dug in on the AI front to say, for example, how do we use ChatGPT's deep research to actually answer these questions? Let's give it a run. Let's see what we can learn together. So one, instead of everyone solving on their own, we've done it as a group. Two, we've learned together about that deep research component. And three, we're moving together with confidence, knowing not only do we do it together, but we're okay with the quality together. And that's something that we can solve. So I think those are things that we could be looking at on the, like, what could we be doing or spending time in to start making those shifts. Just, if helpful, using a personal example that we've started to build.
Yeah, and you mentioned the HCM system that makes me think of the hiring, recruiting, and
Yeah.
how AI is getting embedded in these talent and performance management systems. What impact do you see that having on trust and fairness in the process?
Yeah, I love this question because I think it also really highlights an important one, which is about human impact and human consideration. So I think in everything that we're talking about, what I've seen articulated really well is anytime there's a decision, where is the human touching that, right? How are we building that sort of culture? So one, I would encourage people to think about it that way. I'm actually going to go with hiring because I think this is a place that's shifting really quickly, whether it's from sourcing candidates to the full experience to the selection. Let's assume there's human decisions along the way. But here's what I'll say, and this is the practice of, are we making full intentional decisions about what we're doing? I personally am a big fan of the shift. Like, I actually think from a TA perspective, there's an opportunity here. Talk to any friend or person that you know that's ever applied for a job. It is super noisy out there right now. Someone will apply for a job. They're like, oh, I see 3,000 other people applied to this. We know on the recruiting side, at least half of those, if not way more, are not applicable at all. Literally, it's a bot that's applied or someone that's just shooting off a bunch of resumes. But know what that does? That impacts the person that's actually qualified for the role in a human recruiting experience, because where did they fall in that stack? And did they fill out all the forms the right way? I don't know. So I am a fan of being able to create tools to, like, thumb through that to actually pull out qualified candidates. But I want to highlight something that this to me is the full picture of where we should be careful. Because in that just example, right, we've sourced people, maybe we've like pulled the right candidates that are actually applicable that may not have gotten picked up before by the human eye. However, we are assuming those people also know how to, I'm going to use the term AI, the AI. Did you build your resume the right way? Do you have all the right keywords? Did you get into the machine the right way? All of that. And so what sits behind that is about accessibility to the tools, is about knowledge of the tools. And so what are we doing when that comes along? And so I'll give an example. I'm going to tie it all into, where is the human important? Because if I'm that TA leader, then these are the questions that I should ask the whole system. That's great, we're solving for here, but are we leaving other people out? And back to our example, in this case, maybe we are leaving people out who don't have access or know how to use the tools. Well, maybe the solve now in my recruiting process is actually to provide AI training. We see you're interested in applying for this job. Do you know how to maximize your resume to help support you in applying for this position? Why would we not want to do that? Because if we're not having humans sort, great. keep applying, bring the best candidate forward, but let's make sure that candidate gets in the door. So that was a long example, but I think it touches on so many things we've kicked around. What is AI providing? What's the holistic impact we could be thinking about? What's the responsibility of the organization of not just the AI solve, but perhaps the other barriers that might sit around that AI solve, and the human thinking around that whole system?
Yeah. Basically, are we outsourcing judgment and decision making to the machine, or are we consciously setting up a structure where we've thought through the experience that we want to create, the process that we want to create?
And have we highlighted the unintentional blind spots of making that solve?
Mm-hmm.
And with the blind spots that are seen, how are we creating new wins?
Yeah. And we could have an entirely other episode about AI agents interviewing people, like, instead of
Oh
humans.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, there's layers on layers on this thing. We just like picked one and that was complicated enough. I was trying to make too many points. But I think for sure that's a whole topic. But and one that highlights, we're talking about the recruiting part, but think about customer journeys, think about production, right? Very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to shift that slightly to some of the internal career path standpoints, so with things changing so fast, work's often not defined by static roles or linear paths anymore. How are you and your teams helping people, I guess, rethink their growth and their contribution, their career development throughout this process?
Yeah. A phrase that has been around now for quite some time, and I think we're indexing into it, but I want to evolve it a little bit, which is about marketplace, skill marketplace, the value of skills. I do think that's important. In other words, what skills do I have in my tool belt? How do I use those against the problems I'm trying to solve in the organization? But go with me for a moment. I'm going to expand marketplace. I like to think about in any city or many cities, they have markets that you can go to. Think about there's like all these stalls. If every stall, if the market represented your organization and every stall represented a problem in which to solve, and you go into the market with your skills, right, you can start to shop, right, the problems that we're looking to solve or where we can deliver innovation. And I think careers of the future are going to start to look and sound and feel much more like this. Maybe it's not to tomorrow's shift, but if you think about even the dissolving sort of like full on, maybe it's departments or teams, but it's more about what are the skill sets that I can provide, and could I have more of like an independent contractor mindset, right? I'm like going around and delivering. So if we just go with that concept, what does that do with a career? Well, it's no longer like a path, right? We're thinking about the continual sharpening of those skills to be able to bring to that marketplace to continue to provide value and forward impact to the organizations that we serve. So that's maybe like a visual representation of what I would say, but I think it's absolutely leaning in on skills and where you can continue to accelerate, but using that informing of where your organization is at, what you're trying to solve for, to help prioritize where that development comes from, or externally, right? Even from a subject matter expert standpoint, I think is a good way to consider that.
Well, and on the skill development side, they're talking. It used to be that even technical skills would be good for a decade or more, and now it's 18 months to a few years, and
Absolutely.
before those skills need to be refreshed. And so,
Yes.
yeah, what opportunities are we doing internally as companies to not necessarily have to bring in all these new outside people, but reskilling and upskilling in an efficient way that helps people thrive through change rather than fear and reaction based upskilling, I guess you would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of sits in, we'll call it like the culture category,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe it's that continuous learning culture, the continuous curiosity culture. I think it's breaking the construct of what learning looks like, meaning it's we've talked about capacities being maybe a key part of the equation now of learning, but it's also the more in the moment micro type needs. What am I trying to solve and how do I dig into that? I think it's also using AI tools to help us learn. Hey, I'm trying to do this thing. What's the best way to upskill me in this scenario? Give me a 2 week plan to make that happen for myself. That's on the individual. I'll add another layer, which is like within HR. What are our learning and development teams doing to kind of make that shift, right? To your point around technology shifts. Imagine just a program sitting on the shelf anymore in the future. I think that has to totally change. And I'll give an example. Actually, we went to an AI class over the past couple of months, and the instructor, the program had a framework, right? You knew what your outcomes were. But I will tell you, in the class, we were literally getting market updates while we were there. Okay, we're focused on this outcome, but here's this thing that just launched today, and we're going to learn about that. What they didn't say was a new tool launched today, but we're going to learn about the one from 3 weeks ago because that's what the deck says. So I think that totally changes the mindset of how we produce learning. If I'm in an HR or learning development role, if I'm the leader or the individual trying to learn, it's a mindset shift and how.
Yeah, the culture ones, again, whole other podcast topic on,
Yeah,
on how to build that culture and the mindset that executive leaders need to have to start cultivating that mindset across the organization.
for sure. And I think, the easiest but most difficult part of culture is how you find this balance of like what is the expectation that you have? How do you set the environment in which that happens? Because that's really this sort of like bottoms up approach. But I'll call it the inspect what you expect and also like walk the talk, which is I think executives have an opportunity to shift here too, right? If they're not thinking differently, making decisions differently, shifting this AI mindset, which is it's not just sort of plug and play Google model or like app model, and actually sit in it with their organizations of this is a shift. I do have some things to learn. I think that is probably a number one opportunity. Let it's uncomfortable, but let the guard down a little bit because we are all learning. If you've said you've learned it all, you are missing a huge part of what's possible. You mentioned doing coaching. I think from an executive perspective, if I'm sitting in that seat, I'm thinking, how am I shifting my mindset around leading the organization, how I make decisions, and how I want to show up in being vulnerable and learning. Sharing and showing that you have curiosity, I think will be a huge and positive impact to that culture because everyone's saying, well, if they're learning too, and they don't know, not know, but if they're always in the pursuit of learning, I can too. I think that's a huge win for culture.
100% agree. And yeah, and that brings me to a sort of, as we start to wrap up here, you've had quite a bit of experience in the not-for-profit sector. What do you think for-profit organizations can learn from not-for-profits?
Yeah, love this for two reasons. I think that nonprofits sometimes get a little hard time because they're not driving for profit, but I don't think that changes what they're doing in performance. I think if not more, the mission and the purpose is so much. It's tangible and clearer for people of where they're sitting and what they're delivering, and I think that is rocket fuel, if you will, for how people think about contributing. So that's why I like love the nonprofit moment because everyone needs their moment in the sun. But what can organizations learn? I think first of all, where are they serving communities, like communities, and what their end mission is. I think in today's AI shift, there is a responsibility in organizations in how we think about upskilling, or I'll just say not leaving people behind. How do we bring people forward? And I think in the nonprofit mission driven world, that tends to be a very strong through line in a lot of what service means. You're not leaving something or someone behind. I think another component is community. In nonprofits, you are stretching and building community in so many ways, whether it's fundraising, whether it's sponsors, whether it's the people that you're serving. And I think in an AI world where we are shifting more and more into this like ecosystem of technology, not to say we haven't been there, but I think this is growing even faster, the human connection that comes through community, the opportunity to learn, to innovate, to build our human capacity because we are feeling good about seeing other people in its most simple form. I think we can learn this from nonprofits as well because they are about this community and connection at its core. The last thing I'll say, I think I mentioned two things, but I'll just say I think also leading in nonprofits, right? Like really having that mission driven mindset, understanding what the people need around you. Sometimes and most times you're doing more with less and getting really creative about how to do that. How do we bring that into the corporate world? I think there's no time like now to do that. So I appreciate the question because I think it's a good one. And I think if people look to their community leaders, maybe not even the ones that are the most profound in the headlines, but the ones that are down the street or the ones in their favorite nonprofits, I think there's a lot to learn. Maybe invite them to the table on the conversation.
Absolutely. And I often differentiate between not-for-profit and nonprofit because there are a lot of for-profit companies that are nonprofit. And
true. Very true.
And there are a lot of not-for-profit organizations, charities that are highly profitable. They're just giving those profits back. That's the idea, is that you generate profits so you can support a certain community or cause.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Well, Carlee, it has been awesome to chat, and I know we could continue chatting for ages. And perhaps we need to set up another. I wanted to dive into the sports aspect and those lessons from leadership that can be brought in from the athletic side. I know that's a passion for both of us. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. If we can just take a moment to provide a tip for people, what's something that a question listeners can carry into the new year?
Yeah. Let curiosity drive you, pull you into the future. So what are you curious about right now that you want to learn about, try? And I think take that first step. I think that's the path to learning. I think that's the path to improving. I think that's the path to authoring your story in the time that we're in. So pull on that curiosity.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. And I'll make sure that all your links go up in the show notes so people can connect with you through the podcast page. And what's the best way to reach out to you?
Best way, two big options. One, LinkedIn. I'm very active on these conversations. So if people want to engage, back to community, I always love to hear from people. I also, messages, and also aceneroconsulting.com.
All right. I'll make sure that gets posted. Thank you again. Perfect. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timboris.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Boris with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.